Hey everyone, welcome to a new video, welcome to my channel. My name is Maaike. Today I'm super excited for today's video actually because I am going to be talking to you about my favorite book series. And book series is definitely something that I didn't get around to until like later. I used to only read standalones for the most part. I always thought book series could be a bit tedious, especially if they hadn't been finished. But in the meantime, I've read like 8 different series that fit the criteria of my having read a significant number of books in the series so that I can actually say that I like it. Or maybe the series has already finished and, you know, I've read all the books in the series. So I definitely didn't want to feature things here that I hadn't read enough of. So there are a couple of book series where I've read like the first one that I really loved and I'm super excited for the rest, but I'm not going to include them here. They are definitely book series that are either still ongoing or they're finished, and I've read either all or the majority of the books that are out. So there's definitely sort of like a 50-50 split here between fantasy and detective stories, but they also overlap. Because if there's one thing that I love, it's a detective story with fantastical elements. So let's start with the detective stories first. And the first book I'm going to talk to you about is one I featured in my video last week when I talked about reading YA as an adult. This is one of my favorite YA book series and nobody talks about it. This is Lockwood & Co. by Jonathan Stroud. And in this series, we have an alternate universe where England is dealing with a problem, and this problem is ghosts, and we have children and teenagers who are the only people who can see these ghosts that try to fight them and try to do something about the problem. So it's a super super action-packed sort of urban fantasy kind of story that features around this group of friends who are setting up this agency together and who are trying to sort of not only combat the ghosts but also like skeptical adults at the same time. So it's a really lovely story. It's a 5-part series where at first it doesn't really feel like there's an overarching storyline across all 5 books, but towards the end of the 5th book it's definitely become clear that a lot of things that are already happening in this first one were already sort of, you know, part of the whole game that was going on behind the scenes anyways. And it features mainly a character called Lucy, and she is someone who's looking for work when she travels to London from more up north, and she joins Lockwood & Co. and it's the only teenage run agency in this world. All the other agencies are run by adults. And yeah, it's a really exciting story. It has some mythology, some folklore. It's got a lot of like history because they need to research the places where they go and hunt ghosts to see like who might be there, what might be going on there. And it's just super action-packed, and I loved how this really focused on the banter and the friendship between these characters. It should come to no surprise to you that I'm featuring this book in here. This is The Rivers of London, aka the Peter Grant series by Ben Aaronovitch. And the Peter Grant series focuses on Peter Grant, and in this first book we meet him as he's just graduated police school and he's just joined the London Police Department. And during his first night on patrol he kind of finds out that he can detect and do magic, and all of a sudden this world opens up to him with, I don't know, goddesses that are linked to rivers of London, but also like some sort of like ghost that's hanging around. And it just, every single book focuses on different like magic systems. It's often very much linked to science and to other aspects of real life, and each book sort of takes place in a different part of London as well. There was only one book in the series that I wasn't like the biggest fan of, which was the 4th one called Broken Homes, but I've liked every single other one that he's done. The latest one, False Value, I just read in April. I read it just recently and it was another like great story. He has been criticized for his portrayal of women, but I do feel that as the books progress, he's definitely remedying that, and he's got a couple of really cool female characters in here too. Beverly Brooke, I like her. More on the historical sort of detective kind of realm, we have Oscar de Muriel's The Strings of Murder, also known as the Frey and McGray series, I believe, and that refers to our two main characters, which is Adolphus McGray, who is also nicknamed Nine Nails McGray, because he lost a finger after his sister went crazy and attacked his parents and killed them, and then he tried to stop her, and that's how he lost his finger. And since then he's sort of like traumatized, and he starts to believe in devils and like witchcraft and like all things paranormal, because his sister claims that she saw a devil when she did this, and he's trying to help her figure out what's going on. And he is sort of in charge of this little part of the Edinburgh Police Department in the late 19th century that focuses on all these like presumably paranormal murders and like weird cases. And he's joined by Ian Frey, who comes in from London after some horrible political game goes wrong. His fiance dumps him. He needs to get out of London, so he moves up north. And that every single book in this series, there's 5 of them in total right now. I've read all of them. Each one focuses on a case that presumably is paranormal, but towards the end of the story, you kind of figure out that there's actual science behind it, and the author researches all of these scientific discoveries of the day and age and uses them to set up the cases. So don't read the back yet, because there's always like the explanation of how it actually historically went in the back. But if you want to know how it works, then it's just a really, really cool gimmick that's going on here. And Ian Frey and Nine Nails McGray have like the best banter in history, plus it's got a bit of Scottish in it. What's not to love? And then last but not least, a more like classic detective kind of story would be Robert Galbraith's, aka J.K. Rowling's The Cuckoo's Calling. So The Cuckoo's Calling is the first book in the Cormoran Strike series, and Cormoran Strike is the detective that this series focuses on. There's 4 books out yet. I've read all 4 of them, and I really liked all 4 of them. I think the second one was the best one so far. And this is again like political intrigue, London, but more like modern day. And Cormoran Strike is a veteran who lost his leg in Afghanistan, so he's got a prosthetic leg and it's sort of like bugging him all the time. And I think already in the first book, maybe, but she becomes more important in the later books, we have his assistant Robin, who's starting to help him on his cases. And I love Robin. She's a great character too, and she sort of gets to learn how to be a detective from Cormoran Strike. So that's really lovely. I think the cases are always very clever. It's definitely one of those really good, like stuck in whodunit kind of things. And these are really the kind of detective novels that you can read again with the knowledge of actually who did it, so that you can try and figure it out again. And I think that's really, really lovely. By the way, I didn't feature Harry Potter in this video because I think that's a given, right? Since we're talking about JK anyways. And then for the fantasy stuff, and again, there's a little bit of overlap here because the first series that I absolutely love, and the reason why I knew I wanted to feature this is because I'm currently in the midst of reading the 5th book in the Invisible Library series by Genevieve Cogman. This is again something I don't really hear a lot of people talking about. These are really short, quick-paced, fantasy-esque kind of detective novels that are set around the librarian called Irene. And Irene works for this mysterious organization called the Library that tries to steal books from alternate universes to maintain order between chaos and order. And it's a lovely concept. There's fae in here who represent chaos and dragons who represent order. And in each book, she needs to go to one of these alternate universes to steal books or to fix something in this world to make sure that no one, like humanity doesn't die, pretty much. That's pretty much what she's trying to do. It's very sort of urban fantasy in this first book. The main setting is a Victorian London with steampunk elements, whereas, one of the books is also set in like a 1920s America with guns and lots of gunfights. So each book has its own sort of like alternate universe where most of the action takes place. She has an assistant called Kai. She meets a detective that's very sort of like Sherlock Holmesian in the first novel that plays a big role in a lot of the stories. This is lovely. This is really well done, and it's just really, really, really incredible, sort of like fantasy detective, action-packed. Like, she doesn't get a moment's rest, this lady, Irene, she doesn't, but they are very enjoyable books to read. They're not the most, like, deep fantasy stories you will ever find, but I do not tend to like super epic fantasy. I'm more of an urban fantasy kind of gal. Case in point, urban fantasy doesn't get more urban fantasy than Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files series. This is a book that it was recommended to me by a friend of mine, and this is the first one, Stormfront. The Dresden Files features Harry Dresden, who is a magician who works in Chicago with the police department to sort of combat all of these different magical creatures and things like that. And he has an assistant named Bob, who is a ghost that lives in a skeleton in his office, and he sort of uses Bob like we would use the internet. So he's like, hey Bob, go find this out for me. So it's really, really funny. This book, where Rivers of London has been critiqued for its portrayal of women, like the Dresden Files is even worse. And apparently Jim Butcher started writing these when he was in college, and it's one of the longest running fantasy series on the planet. There's like 16 books out. I've read the first 3 and I really like them. These are super action packed. These are sort of like, you know, it's like CSI but with magic, you could say. So I've always liked CSI as a television series, and these are just really quick, easy reads. I love reading these over the summertime. I'm not sure why, but I read this first one during a summer break, and then I read the next one during summer break, and the next one during summer break. It's just one of those stories you just fall into, and if you need a book that gets you out of a reading slump, try this. And then a book series that I finished and that I absolutely loved was V.E. Schwab's A Darker Shade of Magic. It's a trilogy that consists out of 3 books that focuses on 4 different Londons. We have grey, red, white, and black London. And in each of those Londons, we get different degrees of magic. In grey London, we have no magic. It just doesn't really work there. In red London, magic thrives, whereas in white London, magic is sort of on the verge of collapsing, and in black London, magic collapsed. So that's sort of been, that world has been usurped by magic, you could say. In this book, we meet Kel and Lila, and at first we mainly focus on Kel because he can do this particular kind of magic that allows him to travel to these different Londons, and he delivers his messages to the king. And he meets Lila in Grey London at some point, and she becomes very essential to the story. In White London, we have someone who can, very similarly to Kel, travel to all of these different Londons. There seems to be only one person in each one of these worlds that can do it. And especially in the 3rd book, we also get a lot of his backstory, and I thought that was really, really well done. These were just books I really, really enjoyed. The world building, to me, was really well done. I do think that the bad guy in the end was a bit like of a very obvious bad guy, and the way everything was resolved in the end, I didn't like the last book all that much, but the first and the second I really, really, really liked. Highly recommend it, especially if you're someone who's used to reading a lot of YA fantasy and you want to get into adult fantasy, then this is a really good one. And last but not least, not a series, but definitely a duology, is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I really, really like this book. This was just amazing. Of course, it's a duology, it's not a series, but it is part of the larger Grisha verse that Leigh Bardugo has been expanding quite a bit. I have to say that the original Grisha trilogy was not my favorite. I felt it was a bit too insta-lovey and just not focusing on the right things for me. Like, it was a bit, like, some of the things were a bit convenient, and the whole, like, religious aspect to it was a bit borderline for me, but I felt that what Leigh Bardugo did with Six of Crows was take all of the elements that were really great about the Grisha trilogy and sort of put them into 2 books. So for me, this was great. Six of Crows is about a crew of 6 who are recruited to do this heist in another kingdom, and yeah, in the heart of this stronghold, and they are crooks, they are thieves, they are definitely not the best kind of characters to hang out with, and still you end up rooting for them. I loved Cass as a character and how he sort of tries to keep everybody together, and I loved how in this first book you get this sort of stake that needs to be resolved, like this nugget that makes you want to read the next one. And I love how this is set in a 17th century sort of magical version of Amsterdam. So I thought that was a really, really neat sort of trick with all the Dutch names and references to like canals and things like that. So for me, this was super enjoyable, super duper, just, I don't know, again, friendship in here, which I really, really liked. So those were all of the books that I wanted to recommend in today's video. Those are my top 8 book series. So if you were looking for a new book series to try, there's definitely a few in here that a lot of people have been raving about, but I feel that most people on BookTube don't really rave about that much, but these are my particular favorites. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video and that these recommendations are useful for you. If that was the case, then please thumbs up this video. That would help me very, very much indeed. And if you would like to subscribe to my channel, then that's of course also possible. I make one video a week on Fridays at 6 p.m. Central European Time. So I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!